When I was a rabbinical student at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I started volunteering with a tenant group in Central Harlem that was organizing tenants around issues like getting their heat and hot water turned on, making sure people didn't get evicted from their buildings. And in the course of that work, I started looking at some Jewish texts around the relationship between landlords and tenants to try to figure out whether ancient texts would have anything to say about the contemporary situations that I was seeing in Harlem. And what I found out was that the rabbis were actually speaking about the exact same situations that I was seeing in Harlem. So I might be sitting one day with a woman who was fighting with her landlord about getting her heat turned on, and then I would go and I would study a text in which the rabbis say that a landlord has a responsibility to make sure that the apartment or the building that he or she has rented out is safe and secure for the tenants. Now, the rabbis certainly couldn't have known this woman in Harlem. They didn't even know about central heat, and yet they were talking about the exact same issues. One of the texts that really spoke to me that year that I was doing this work was a Maimonides text in which he talks about the landlord, when he or she needs to evict a tenant, making sure to give enough notice to make sure that this person isn't, in Maimonides' words, mushlach baderech, just sent out or abandoned on the street. And so the landlord has to, first of all, give sufficient notice. The landlord can't evict somebody during the winter when it's apparently, at least during that time, was more difficult to rent apartments or houses during the winter, and certainly it was cold or it was raining, and so it was much less pleasant to be outside. And the landlord can't evict somebody when it's very unlikely the person's going to find a place to live. And I was thinking about that a lot as I talked to tenants who were living in an area that was quickly becoming gentrified, whose landlords were trying to use all sorts of methods to evict them, and it was unlikely that people were going to be able to find new places to live, especially in their neighborhood. So I would be talking to people who had lived in the same apartment for sometimes 40, 50, 60 years who were going to be mushlach baderech. They were going to be abandoned in the street. And again, Maimonides couldn't possibly have known that this situation would happen in Harlem, and yet he was able to speak from the perspective of a tenant who's worried about what will happen to him or her if the landlord succeeds in evicting him or her when there's no other apartments to be had.